Hi, welcome. I think we're probably in the middle of an AI hype cycle. You can buy an AI-enhanced toaster. Pretty much everyone is trying to put AI into every product going. But if there's one area where there's real potential for meaningful change, it's in healthcare. Artificial intelligence is being explored for drug discovery, automating surgery, analyzing scans for diagnostics, optimizing how patients interact with health services. So there's huge potential for benefits to human health. Here today to discuss some of these impacts, we have two leaders from research organizations at the forefront of looking at AI in health. Andy Hickel is the Chief Technology Officer of the Allen Institute, a non-profit biomedical research organization that wants to advance health by answering some of the biggest questions in bioscience. Susan Thomas is Director of Google Health for UK, Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. Google Health is committed to helping everyone, everywhere, be healthier through products and services that connect and bring meaning to health information. Please welcome them to the stage. Andy, Susan, thank you for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. Where to start? Maybe we could just, to begin with, based on what your organizations focus on, where do you think AI is going to have an impact on healthcare in the coming years?
I think it's inevitable. It's going to have a huge impact. And in fact, it already is, right? We see AI in healthcare already, particularly in that sort of predictive, that sort of second wave of AI where lots of algorithms were built around diagnostics, and stroke care here in the UK is as part of the hyperacute stroke pathway. Having your scan read by an algorithm is now pretty standard. So we're already seeing that sort of impact. With this sort of third wave of AI, generative AI, I think the growth could be exponential. But clearly there are some guardrails on that. We've all got very excited about where this might go. Are we actually seeing anything quite in practice yet? Probably not, but there are loads of opportunities. I think the two main areas will be in how consumers interact with healthcare. So how do I access information about health? How do I access sort of services will be really different because of generative AI. And then how hospital systems and healthcare systems work is going to change as well, as we see sort of generative AI do things like summarization of medical records, as we see them sort of help with efficiency and workforce implications, as we see multimodal come to the fore and you start pulling in genomics information, scan information, text information. Inevitably, it's going to have an impact. And you don't have to hear a government or a shadow government minister speaking where they don't mention health as sort of the cutting edge use for generative AI, and we're up against Wes at the moment. I'm sure he'll be doing that in the other room, but yeah.
Andy, what about the Allen Institute?
We're super enthusiastic about the prospect of AI, but we're one level below the direct delivery of healthcare. The Allen Institute is a nonprofit bioscience research institute founded by my friend and fellow mentor, Paul Allen, dedicated to the proposition that fundamental breakthroughs in the biosciences actually can have tremendous impact on the human health outcomes. And so when we work, we look at constituting institutes that focus on 10 to 15-year challenge problems, whether that's in neuroscience or cell science or immunology or even kind of synthetic biology. And so we're looking at actually applying AI to kind of the fundamental problems in terms of biology. And so we're seeing things in terms of breakthroughs in terms of kind of understanding the structure and function of the human brain, or the operating system of the cell, or the function or the development of the human immune system over time. And so we're actually seeing breakthroughs in terms of AI being used in tremendous kind of improving the clarity and the accuracy of our algorithms to actually do things like understanding how cells interact in the brain, or actually understanding how disease can be detected earlier. So a case in point for us is we're seeing tremendous work with AI being used to recognize Alzheimer's disease 10 years before the onset of the actual symptoms, by using kind of foundational models that have been trained on the kind of work that we've been doing for the last 20 years in cataloging cell structure and function from the brain.
So it sounds like you're operating kind of at the different sort of limits of the spectrum, kind of the earlier stage research, and then sort of things that are more consumer focused. Can you say a little bit about what Google Health, like what interventions or products are sort of there that people may be able to sort of start seeing kind of in settings?
Of course. I mean, already we're seeing on our devices and watches and phones, generative AI being sort of brought into play. So any of you that use Workspace will see the really easy and simple uses of that, like write an email for me and kind of write an email in a formal way or whatever. And I know that's not healthcare usage, but you can see how those sorts of things could soon be transported into healthcare. So if you think about when you go and visit a doctor and you're given a diagnosis and a doctor says to you, Mrs. Jones, you've got carcinoma of your esophagus and this is what we're going to be doing and it's grade 3A and we're going to have to give you this sort of oncological treatment and yada, yada, yada. And you come out and you're like, Jesus, what have I just been told? And you're shell-shocked and you don't understand most of those words and you didn't even know that you had an esophagus, right? Now, I started my life as a doctor. I witnessed those conversations where consultants did those sorts of, kind of spoke in that way. Imagine a future where, and then we talk about health literacy and we say, we need to increase people's health literacy so they can understand these things. But actually that's really wrong, right? Because that puts the blame onto individuals for poor health literacy rather than on us how we explain it. And it puts the burden on them to improve themselves rather than us saying, how can we help them? Imagine a future where you could go into that meeting and you could record it or you could get a letter from your doctor and that's translated it from that speak into something that makes sense for you. So you've got a growth in your gullet. This is what's going to happen. These are the sorts of treatments. And we can sort of ratchet that according to your health literacy, which is okay to have that level of health literacy, if that makes sense. So I think there's going to be huge advances from where we're seeing already in sort of the email, write a CV, all of those sorts of things, to how people access information in a different way. We're already seeing it, for instance, on Lens. Any of you have an Android phone and you can take a photo. Probably not here in the UK, actually, but if you're in the US or in Japan or many other geographies, you can take a picture of a mole on your skin and it will come up with this is an image that looks like using an AI algorithm, so you can go on the next step of your health pathway. It's really hard to describe a skin rash or a mole in text. Right, I've got a red ishy rash. It's sort of over the back of my hand. Well, where's the back of my hand? So it's really hard to do it. If you can take a photo and have Google help you on that journey, that feels quite astonishing. So those are just some of the easy ways that a consumer might start accessing better information about their health.
These are fantastic interventions. They're also, we're speaking to two organisations with tech backgrounds, sort of US origins, and we know kind of the history of medicine is that those who are overserved tend to be those who get the benefit of things that are released. What do we think AI is going to do for access to healthcare? Does this make it easier for people to get, a route to better health, or does the fact that these things are highly technological interventions mean that actually we're going to have a widening of kind of the access gap?
I think it definitely improves the access to materials like we've seen this firsthand in terms of clinical trials matching. The same thing that we're seeing in terms of actually improving the access and readability of emails, or is actually improving access to readability of journal articles in clinical trials as well. And so you don't necessarily have to have the medical expertise to actually interpret the primary sources to actually understand what's going on. And so I think democratization gets used is way too often. But ultimately, what we're seeing is the great leveling of the playing field in terms of as these tools become available to everyone. Now, the real challenge is how do we make these tools available to everyone in a way that is actually truly equitable? And I think that's a challenge that we don't really have a full, complete, and satisfying answer to at this point.
I'd agree with that. I think there's sort of an input and an output bit of this, right? There's how do we make the data sets that we're training our models on non-biased, unbiased? How do we know, it's very easy for a data set, say, of mammograms in the screening program to have an overrepresentation of white middle-class women as opposed to black African Caribbean women from in the UK. So how do we make sure that those training sets aren't biased? And that's a really important part of the sort of the setup of any clinical trial and so on and so forth, so that we're making sure that they're fully represented. But then in terms of the outputs, I genuinely believe health AI has AI in health rather has the opportunity to be transformative from an equity perspective. I'll just, if I may, tell you about one of the products that we're building at the moment. We have a product that with 3 sweeps using a cheap ultrasound probe of a pregnant woman's abdomen can tell the gestational age and the presentation of the fetus. So whether or not there's a breech, presentation, and also how old the baby is. And we did that study in the US with Northwestern University. It was really successful, and the really exciting thing about it was you do it on a low-cost ultrasound probe, so you don't need an expensive fancy machine, and also there was no difference between the results that an ultrasonographer did and any one of us 3 who have never held an ultrasound probe would get. So suddenly you can think about the antenatal pathway in low resource settings, which is extraordinarily precarious, where women arrive late in emergency presentations, needing an emergency section because there is limited supply of that intervention. Imagine now being able to have an ultrasound probe offline where a community health worker can do that, look at, and then triage the women. This woman is at risk. We will now get her onto the right pathway, but we're doing that when she's 20 weeks, when she's 24 weeks pregnant, not when she's 36 weeks and in emergency bleeding from a ruptured uterus or whatever it is.
That's compelling. One of the things we're working at is, one of the 3 questions people ask me is, why do I care if a large language model or a foundation model is 1 trillion parameters? And one of the answers that I give people is that it actually improves the acuity of the response of the model, even when you actually have degraded signal. And so one of the things we're looking at is actually doing disease screening from blood samples, but using actually a smaller set of immunological assays. And so we can actually, with a smaller amount of blood and actually with a fewer amount of samples, we can actually screen people for rheumatoid arthritis or Alzheimer's disease or other kinds of diseases with less blood. Just largely because we have a larger model behind the scenes that actually is able to kind of do more with less.
So it sounds like there's real potential to kind of roll out these things to settings where resources maybe aren't as high as where they're kind of originating from.
Right.
Yeah. We can't really get away from generative AI. I mean, I think that's probably the form of AI that most people sort of encounter most commonly, kind of on a day-to-day basis. And we've touched on it a little bit, but I'd be interested to know where we can expect generative AI to have an impact in healthcare. I think things like synthetic biology and the creation of kind of new proteins, novel antibodies that are not present in nature. These things sound fascinating, and it feels like the potential here is huge. But should we be excited by this, or is this a realm that is still quite far away from impacting people?
I think it's not that far away, and I think we should be excited. I know that one of my colleagues, Pushmeet, spoke this morning from the AlphaFold team, and where that is going to be able to take us, I think does feel astonishing. But I do think that there is stuff that's a little bit closer. We have to be cautious. At times, it really reminds me when people are getting excited about generative AI of my son when he was 8 playing football on a Saturday morning at Hackney Marshes, and you'd have like 16 8-year-olds running after the ball and they'd all go over here and then they'd all go over here, like really excited things. And there's all this space here and it's like, do some stuff here. So we mustn't forget that not everything in healthcare needs to be about generative AI. There's really exciting things you can do with a phone and a watch around care pathway redesign. But then if you start thinking about how you loop generative AI into that, well, could you think about sort of personal coaching for people with long-term conditions? We launched in our Fitbit labs about, I think, October last year, a generative AI personal fitness coach on the Pixel and Fitbit watches. So sort of helping you think about why was your run sluggish this morning, and you sort of start to have a conversation. Well, how did you sleep last night? And your diet was different, and sort of coaching you about, therefore, how you might want to change your exercise program. That's very much in the wellness space. Again, think about going downstream a bit into people who have cardiovascular disease, say asymptomatic hypertension. How do you coach those people to take their medications on time, to eat more healthily, to take the exercise that they need to do, etc. And you can start to see how conversational AI might really change the way that happens.
Assistants that are actually helpful for health, basically.
That's right.
Andy, what about kind of further upstream than that, sort of, in the more basic research realms? Are there any sort of generative kind of
Well,
applications
definitely.
of
I
AI?
mean, we're using it to actually generate synthetic data to be able to actually do cross-species modeling of the brain. So we're actually going from one species where we know a lot about in terms of the mouse and where we have ample kind of sources of data. Where it's easy to sample the mouse tissue because there's plenty of mice willing to provide their tissue. To the species where it's a lot harder to actually get samples in terms of humans. So we're actually using it there. We're actually using generative AI to help decode kind of scientific literature. So we can actually ask and answer questions about papers and actually improve access to the kind of information that's out there. I think that whether you take generative AI seriously or not, the drug companies are definitely doing that. I think the estimate that I've seen most recently is that there's about $2.5 billion of R&D money per month being outlaid right now by the drug companies into generative AI techniques for drug discovery alone. And what was seen fanciful 18 months ago in terms of thinking about a contract among scientists to say we will never develop bioweapons using generative AI came to the forefront 2 weeks ago. And I was proud to be one of the 90 signatories of a contract that said, we will not use our brand new AI know-how to actually develop pathogens, but ultimately it's in the conversation at this point. Right, we're developing designer drugs and designer therapeutics. There's no reason to say that we couldn't be designing bioweapons as well.
And I guess my question is that close? You talk about kind of things being sort of over there versus here. Are we kind of at the peak of the hype cycle, and do we need to brace ourselves for a little bit of realism in terms of how quickly some of these things are going to come through, or are we right to be kind of riding this wave? Because it feels like I certainly get a lot of people messaging me saying, this is the latest application of AI in health, and this is going to be transformative. But it's a lot of projection, it feels like, at the moment, and we know from kind of technology generally there is a sort of peak of enthusiasm, and then often there's a trough of disillusionment that follows, and then we end up somewhere in the middle. Can we expect that sort of trajectory?
We definitely have to educate ourselves. I mean, I was pinged over the weekend from one of my board members who said there was a company that announced that they built a foundation model for all of biology. And they asked me, when are you going to have a foundation model for all of biology? And I said, never. We're never going to have one foundation model for all of biology. We're going to have dozens. And they're going to be all tuned to specific tasks. And it was the fact that I had to have that conversation to kind of break it down to first principles that was kind of eye-opening for the conversation. I think there's, but I think like in any enterprise, we need to have basic foundations that we need to lay down. Things like, where's the data coming from, and ultimately understanding our data provenance, understanding the explanation, really kind of understanding why we should actually trust the model, and ultimately it's more than responsible AI. It's actually understanding what is the chain of reasoning that actually goes into the production of that answer, and actually understanding what does that mean for a biological context. And we're beginning to understand what that means in terms of a model like Gemini or the Copilot models or the ChatGPT style models in terms of kind of understanding really what it means to produce an explanation. We don't have any kind of starting point to really understand what that means to do in a healthcare context or in a biology context.
We've touched on this a little bit, and
yeah.
I'll ask this question, and I think we've got some great questions from the audience as well. But you mentioned this agreement that you signed with 90 other signatories about how generative or AI should not be used for certain purposes that could be harmful. What other guardrails do you think we need to kind of be thinking about or putting in place now ahead of what might be possible in the future with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely privacy is one of the big challenges that we have. I mean, I think especially in the healthcare context. I mean, we all want our patient records to be used and sourced as input when the model's considering us for a therapeutic. We don't necessarily want our data to be used to be part of the hive mind to actually consider for improving the quality of a model going forward. And so things like differential privacy and things like federated learning are going to be kind of big areas of investment that I feel like we should be thinking about investing in. It's not just kind of enough to give a head nod towards privacy. We need to actually put our money where our mouth is and kind of actually understand the technology infrastructure that we did build behind that.
And I think we have sort of, I guess, in the products actually coming into clinical practice, we have the guardrails of having the MHRA there to sort of put the constraints around clinical regulation or medical device regulation. Although I do think there are challenges there around the capacity and the sort of the technical know-how of the notified body system to navigate this new world of generative AI. However, it does mean that there is sort of a bit of a foot on the brake about actually getting some of these products into clinical practice, which is helpful as we start to work out what those guardrails should be more broadly.
We have some questions from the audience, so I'm going to sort of dip into these. Someone asks, how do we keep the human in the loop in AI systems in health and ensure that outputs are explainable such that health experts remain accountable for decisions? So I guess this is getting at, is there a future where we lean too much into giving over decision-making power to...
So we get asked this a lot, and I think we're all at Google really comfortable in saying that health is essentially a human endeavor at its heart. We did a piece of research with Ipsos last summer about digital technology more broadly and kind of consumers' willingness to engage with digital technology in their healthcare. And people want to do that, but they don't want to do that at the cost of losing contact with their known healthcare professional. Right. So that human bit is really important. So I don't think we believe anytime soon, if at all, AI will replace a doctor or a healthcare professional. I do think we believe that a doctor with AI and other digital technologies will replace doctors who don't embrace those things. So I do think that the doctor and the healthcare professionals will stay at the heart of it, and therefore by default and remain accountable for the decisions that they are making.
We see very similar things in terms of the scientists in the lab as well. The AI is going to be very soon going to be generating hypotheses from the data even before the experiment is done, and helping propose conclusions or other directions for research. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the human scientists to decide which avenues to pursue and which ones they're going to leave alone.
Yeah, so it's this idea of enhanced intelligence, really, rather than artificial intelligence.
Yeah, cognitive orientation.
What do you think, if this isn't too much of a sort of crystal ball exercise, what do you think the healthcare landscape will look like in 10 years' time as far as AI is concerned?
So I think the way we interact with the healthcare system as consumers of health will really feel different. We know that there are really significant challenges in the developed world. Certainly, I mean, we all live and breathe the NHS in terms of capacity, in terms of workforce, etc., and the pressures on the system. So as we start to see the sorts of products that I've talked about, the more conversational AI, where it's they're coaching you and helping you navigate your disease pathway in a different way, potentially helping you keep more well earlier upstream. Right. I think we will see a really changed landscape in terms of that.
I think the notion of context will change dramatically. Yeah. I mean, you won't be going into a doctor's office and saying, "Give me a generic solution to the generic set of problems that I have."
That's right.
You'll be able to go in and expect a full characterization of the problem that you have and a full personalized solution for the actual the therapeutic that'll meet that problem.
Okay, that's really exciting. Thank you both so much for your time. We're really grateful to have you here, sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.